Welcome, everybody, to Aeon Bite, specifically our Finding Hermes podcast, where we discuss alternative ways for healing, addiction, and general good living. And I am very excited to be hosting Shelley Kaehr to discuss a book that I really enjoyed. And I think I can't wait to delve into the exercises. And I think it's an important book. Ancestral Energy Healing, a Guidebook. Shelley, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Miguel. It's a joy to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine. And with us, too, we've got Graham Pong. Graham, how are you doing?
Very good. Looking forward to hearing about the ancestral energy. I just started exploring some of my ancestors in the last couple of years, so should be very pertinent.
Indeed. So, Shelley, before we get into your work, or actually we'll get into your work, how did you come into these alternative or esoteric disciplines?
Oh, wow. It's kind of since childhood. I had a very strange upbringing. When I was a kid, my mother attended a luncheon where the guest speaker was the subject of the very famous past life regression book, The Search for Bridie Murphy. If listeners remember that oldie but goodie. So she actually went and met the lady and the hypnotherapist. I lived in Colorado Springs at the time. And this was a very famous past life regression case about a normal woman who was having really bad allergies, and she went to an allergist. It didn't work. So she wound up at the hypnotherapist, and they were doing some regression work. And finally he said, look, I want you to go back to the source of those allergies. And she went back into this life in Ireland and reported her findings. And so my mother's at this luncheon when I'm a little kid, meeting these people, bringing this book home to the family dinner table. So I don't know, Miguel, what normal people were talking about and doing when they were a kid. But we were actually having the discussion of reincarnation at the family dinner table. And there was just something about it that really struck me as, wait a minute, this actually makes sense. And then in adulthood, then I started becoming interested in it again after a friend of mine was killed in an accident. And I began having visionary encounters with his deceased self. And someone finally said, well, maybe you need a past life regression. And I had one, and it was so transformational that I started just learning about how to do it and doing this for others. And then in the interim, like I said, I've written a lot of books. So I'd had like a trip into the light. I had a near-death experience, and I had energy in my hands when I came back from this. And I was shown just a lot of different things about, particularly in the way that I've always approached healing and regression, that we can talk about things, we can go into guided imagery, but that there's actually an energetic component to memory that needs to be moved, the frequencies raised and addressed. And then the combination of these two things together, there's a real transformative healing that can take place. And so then I just started writing many books. And one of the things that was happening is that my books on gem healing, I wrote a lot of those, and they became very popular. And so I was putting the past life stuff kind of to the side, but I was always doing this in the background. And so a lot of people were coming for regressions, but I intuitively would sense, wait a minute, before we need to go into any past lives, we've got to do some healing with the family, in the current life. And so I would take them into this interdimensional world where they could have a visionary encounter with the higher self or the soul essences of their parents, whether they've known their parents before, whether they haven't, whether they were deceased or estranged. And then they could have some conversations and do some healing there. And then this evolved into something I developed called the genealogical regression, where we would then, after we do this current life healing, hey, mom and dad, does anybody need a healing like on their family tree? And let's say mother's higher self says, yes, I do. And so we could then travel down this line. And instead of having visionary encounters with, whoever we were in the Middle Ages, we are now experiencing floating over events and scenes that happened to the ancestors. And people could point out, like, who's your ancestor there? Okay, great. And normally, because healing, obviously, as you well know, we don't normally look into healing unless, things are not maybe going as well as we'd like.
Right.
I wish we would be more proactive, but human beings really aren't. So normally this is like a death or an illness or a battle. So we might just float out, for example, over a battle and start sending light to the ancestors, and then acknowledging and realizing then that there's light then that moves into the cells in the body, and the people would start to feel better and again, just in a different way, start to recognize that there was a shift happening that could be, used for the better good. So it's been a journey. That's all I can tell you. A long one.
It is. So. It is a journey because once I realized, oh my God, I have to work on my trauma and my karma. Then I realized, oh my God, I got to work on my ancestors' trauma. And what did I expect? We all think we're just going to be like Siddhartha or Paul of Tarsus, and one flash will be fine. It's like, oh my God, the work doesn't end. And then I'm thinking, if time isn't linear, probably some of my descendants are working to help my trauma, and I have to work their trauma. And it's like, oh my God, it's a lot of work, but I embrace it because it is a pleasure to get to know these individuals. And it's also it feels good to help them because they're in pain and they've done things, and I am there to help them to sort of break the flow and hopefully break the cycle that will continue forever, unless in this linear timeline somebody starts to break and heal those I don't know, blockages, if you would.
Yeah, I'm laughing only because I'm telling you what, as somebody who just spent years and years just obsessing over past lives, I hadn't really been on the receiving end of a lot of the genealogical work until, much later. I had put a book out in 2021, and then I realized, wait a minute, this is starting to become a global phenomenon. I think like you and me, everybody's starting to go, wait a minute, it isn't our past lives. It's more than that. And the ancestors are a huge part of what we're trying to heal. And I totally agree with what you're saying. Somebody has to get off this crazy train or whatever we're on here for a minute and take a moment and just send that light forwards and backwards in times. And I think we're at a really interesting time in human history that we have the luxury, let's say, to even get into these kinds of conversations because of where we are as a society. So it is important. And I'm just like you. I thought, darn, man, I thought I was done with this. What's going on here?
Never ends.
It's amazing.
Yeah, at the same time, don't you think we've kind of dropped the ball? Because it's almost like we shouldn't have lost this idea of the ancestors in the West, because obviously you look at from the Greeks to the Mayans, and even today, the Chinese and the Indians, they always have the dead. Their ancestors are always present and helping them. And of course, they help them back. It's a huge team effort. Here in the West, why do you think we dropped the ball? And again, you could say not Roman Catholics, because Roman Catholics are still, intercession of the dead are always around. The ancestors are always in the, when I was a Catholic, we'd go to masses on the anniversary of my we always kept them alive, and we're always communicating with them. Same with Mexicans. The dead are hugely important for them. Why do we drop the ball here as Westerners?
I don't know. You've brought up some excellent examples. It's kind of in the background, but I think, I don't know. There's so many choices that we have in spirituality and religion, perhaps in the West, where maybe some of the other cultures have the whole society joining together. I think we've just kind of left it by the wayside and in favor maybe of the iPhone. I mean, I don't really know. And then once the ancestors finally started clobbering us over the head and saying, hello, we need help, then we're starting to wake up to that. But I don't know. I have no idea. It's got to be something to do, though, with, I think, maybe different organized religions just wanting to, let's focus on what we're trying to do here rather than bringing in anything else that perhaps people could do on their own. I don't know.
Yeah, and once a year we'll drop off flowers at their grave and then forget about them until this and that. But like you said, these things will manifest in your body. Finally, in my 50s, I'm finally listening to my body. So I know if there's trauma or something I need to take care of, my shadow, it will manifest in my body and I can catch it. Same with the ancestors. If you're, like you said, if you're not listening to them, they're going to tap you on the shoulder with some disease or hate to say it, even cancer. I mean, this is life and death. This is the universe we're talking about. And your book, I love how you bring the idea that even from a secular point of view, it's important because as you give the evidence, the trauma of our ancestors or their issues is epigenetic, right? It is brought down and we need to address it. And I love that study you gave us, how Holocaust survivors or the children of Holocaust survivors have much more higher chances of getting diseases because, again, this is being handed down to the descendants, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great point because like all these years I'm doing past life regressions, and in my practice, it wasn't really as important to me. There are many researchers that want to spend several years trying to prove that this person was that person in a past life. It's a lot harder to prove, but now we have epigenetics, we have the Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, and other reputable worldwide organizations studying epigenetics and the effect of stress and trauma on the genes. So this isn't just crazy Shelley again, making up some crazy stuff. You know, it's woo-woo. I did develop the genealogical regression back in the early days before this was widely known. But the truth is this stuff is real. We are acknowledging it. It has to be addressed. And then I think this gives people more permission now to take a closer look at this as well.
Agreed. Yeah, for the audience, she comes up, the studies are all there, the research, it's all there. I like to use a book, I don't know if you're familiar with it, which really I think breaks open the whole mind-body healing. It's Gabor Mate and his sons, The Myth of Normal, and it's just research after research after research. And yes, again, he does the same thing. Epigenetics is important. If your ancestors lived in a ghetto or lived in poverty, you're going to feel it a generation down. Or if there were in a war, it gets handed down. Just for that, it's important to know, to have the information about your ancestors and what they went through from both, physical and a spiritual point of view, right?
Absolutely. And we've got ways to look that stuff up now, with Ancestry.com and some of these other websites. I mean, you can actually go and find out some of these things and have actual records and photographs and things that you can actually look at. I've actually had clients going through some of these processes who actually came up with the name, like a name came to them, and then they were able to go look that up and confirm that name that they had never heard of was an actual ancestor. So that's why this can be very powerful. And then once you know that, armed with that information, you can go even deeper.
Yeah, for sure. Because sometimes you're going to have to go into the inner world or the mystic world, because on my Portuguese side, it's all written down. Again, German Jews came to Portugal, and then they had to convert to Catholicism. They went underground, and there's a grand drama, but it was all recorded. But here on my Irish side, it's harder because my grandparents and great grandparents lived in the Depression, upper Midwest, and there was no records in the Depression. You know what I mean? It was the wild Midwest, I guess you suppose. So, but doing meditation, some of your exercises, working with therapists. I mean, like you said, a name comes through, a message comes through, go here. We need to work on this. And you start doing active imagination and having conversations. There's many methods that I use, and eventually you start making breakthroughs because they're always listening and they're always talking. And don't you agree?
They are. And we need only quiet the mind or have the feeling about what's the next best choice that I need to do in this moment to realize that we are loved and guided and protected if we will just reach out and accept that.
Well said, indeed. And what do you think, Graham, so far about what we're saying? Any questions for Shelley or comments?
Actually, I do. It's one that I'm kind of running into myself and some of my challenges dealing with some of the past lives. And that's that I see a difference between my personal past lives, the various bodies that I've inhabited, versus my family lineage. And it's like I've been born into many different family lineages. And it's like I see those two as kind of like a weave that, across those. And I was wondering what Shelley had to say about the two different threads that I see weaving together.
Wow, Graham, that's really cerebral. And I'm going to answer it. I'm in this web. You're right, because it's like a big web. You've got your mother's side of the family, your mother and father, and then all of the descendants branching out on both sides of the family. And then you've got your own soul and the places and individuals, let's say the places you've been, the individuals you've been in the past lives kind of interweaving. And, a lot of people do believe that they have reincarnated with their family members. I mean, I think that's pretty common. Obviously, we're going to pick some button pushers to show up for us in our life and help us, make things a little more challenging, I think, sometimes. And it is like a web. I guess one of the books that I had that came out, I don't remember when anymore. It's called Journeys Through the Akashic Records. I think that was 2022, where I put out every kind of guided imagery journey that I have ever created for people over the course of my 20 plus years doing this. And in all these journeys, even in this current book, Ancestral Energy Healing, we're going to go into that mystical world. We're going to cross the threshold into a space where we can then start having these visionary encounters with either guides, relatives, ancestors, parents, whoever needs to get us where we're going. And so to a certain degree, I think, therapeutically, let's say, it's helpful to try to untangle the web that we've woven for ourselves and maybe try to just address one line of this at a time. But yes, the visual, Graham, it's just so true. It's very tangled, and we might go down one path and wait a minute, there's father's ancestral line connecting with mother, and there I am too, and we're all in some different time together. I mean, it's very interesting. And then it's really all embedded in our body. I mean, it comes out inside the physical body and the emotional body in different ways. And so however it is we can detangle this enough just to send some light into these areas, every little bit does help, but it's kind of a tangled web we've woven for ourselves, I think.
And it gets, I don't even want to bring some of the Kabbalistic systems that make it even more complicated, Shelley, where not only you reincarnate back and forward in time, but you can have two like divine sparks within you. In other words, there's some karmic mission that two souls have to figure out. So they go into your body. So there could be two beings inside of you, Shelley, that have this karmic, and then one reincarnates in the past and one goes to, 1,000 years in the future. It's like, oy vey. It's like, just when you think you've got there, the work has to continue.
Yes, it's very strange, to put it mildly. I don't know if that addressed your question, Graham, but other than I say, I hear you.
Largely it does. Yeah, no, you've explored a lot of my neglected area, which is my biological family lineage and traditions. Like I said, the personal past lives were the ones that I was wrestling with over the last few years, and only recently started dealing more with my family lineage.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I wasn't really looking into the family lineage as much. Like I said, I would occasionally, I created the genealogical regression back in the early 2000s, and occasionally I felt it was appropriate to use that. But really, once I wrote this, the book that came out in 2021, that's the precursor to this one, and then started teaching some of this, that's when I guess the universe decided it was time for me to get a big wake-up call. And so I came down with pneumonia. I had pneumonia or something. I had an unhealing fever. I went to the doctor. I remember her standing out in the hall going, like literally, like with her hand on her chin, looking in the examination room. And she came in and said, well, you've got pneumonia, but your oxygen saturation level is in the 90s. So I don't understand what's going on, but I'm going to go ahead and put you on some medicine and send you home. And I was like, look, I don't have time to go to the hospital, so I'll just go home and try to get over this. And while I was laying in my bed, writhing in pain, I started having things occur to me that there was physical, excruciating pain, and that this pain was dealing with the ancestors. I was shown like what things were relating to my mother's side of the family, what were relating to my father's side of the family. And I just allowed myself to just sit there and experience this excruciating pain. And I think back in 2019, I had gone to a silent meditation of Vipassana meditation, which is the teachings of the Buddha, where we get locked in a place for 10 days. And none of my family thought I could keep this mouth shut for 10 days. Thank you very much. And I did. But in that experience, I had excruciating pain, or I'd have emotional, like one day we're on a cushion, right? In a sanctuary. I was like, oh, I'm scared to death. This is terrorizing. And I open up my eyes and go, there's nothing to be afraid of. So stuff is coming up, right? In the silence. And there was a lot of like experiences of like a sword coming out of my back, or feeling my neck get put back on after it's rolling down a few hills over the centuries. And I felt like that was more relating to my past lives. And this feeling of stillness and this experience, like, I really think it was a grace of God that I had that, so that when the pandemic came, I was even able to put up with that as a very hyperactive person, which I normally am. And so when this other thing happened, which was about in 2021, during this strange time where I feel like I slipped into the space fabric somewhere, and I was shown many things, of which this was one piece of it. There were so many things that occurred to me during this strange trip that I kind of put it away, and I just said, I don't even know how to digest this right now. I showed it to some students and some clients, and I found that the ancestral work for them, I think because when we're dealing with our family, it's real. These aren't just, I mean, I believe that we lived in past lives. That's real. But again, to the level that we could really prove these people existed, I have found even from the earliest times that anything that is to do with the real, this life family or the ancestors feels so much harder. It's more emotional. And so people were having, a really challenging time going through some of the things as I tried to figure out how am I going to show people how to hopefully have some semblance of the experience that I had without going through this strange experience that I went through. And so I think it's just a peeling back, as you both know, of just what can I do today? Is it just, I can send a little bit to it. Maybe I go a millimeter further than I was yesterday. It's not, like you said earlier, bam, I'm done. Woo, I'm ready to party. It just isn't like that at all. And, we all know that, but yet I guess we still keep hoping, So anyway, it's just, I'm glad that this book is finally out. I hope that it will, I remind the readers throughout, if this isn't something you feel you can do today, then just put this away and just do what feels right. And just in the time and place of the unfolding that we're all going through here, I think as a collective, as we're all, like you said, finally in the West, waking up to why this is important to do. It's because it's in our body right now.
Yeah, well said indeed. Yeah, the past is not even past. As the saying goes, it's always there. And we got, especially in the new age esoteric crowd, that, we're only living in the present. And there's no, the past is important. It's the moment never ends. It's always happening in one point of time, and it has to be addressed. If I had one criticism of your book, is that as soon as I read it, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to go on YouTube. I'm going to go to her website. She must have some guided meditations, because again, I was like, there's so much, you take us through the process, but some of us want to sit there in our room with our incense or lay at night and have someone take us. Do you have that coming out? Or
It's coming. It will be coming. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, let me know. And I highly suggest to the listener, get the book, but have some of these guided meditations take you through it, because again, it's and don't operate heavy machinery.
Yeah.
If you're going to go deal with your ancestors. That's probably how one of your ancestors died, if that happened. But anyway, and just going through some of the points of your book, Shelley, you talk about a higher self, but I like you give a little bit of a different angle to the higher self, right?
Yes, that this is kind of the all-knowing aspect of yourself or those you encounter. I think particularly when we're dealing with parents, sometimes that can be really sticky. So we need to kind of differentiate the fact that this isn't necessarily the physical person who you're interacting with, or maybe you've never interacted with them before, or there's some real trauma or difficulty there. You're trying to get in touch with the soul essence of the person so that maybe on that level you can just level up a little bit and meet them on a more neutral space that can help you do the work in that way.
Yeah, for the audience, so when you do these exercises, yeah, especially if you go deep in the past, as Shelley says, you're not alone. You create this guide, like I guess Beatrice and Dante or Philemon and Jung, right? You're creating this guide who is your ancestor, but is there to take you even deeper into the past, right?
Absolutely. Yes. I've always had people work with a guide as they're going on any of these journeys, really, because I feel like it's good to have someone by your side who is established as someone who loves you. They know everything about you. They're going to have your back as you cross through these different doorways, and they'll be able to talk to you, explain things to you, and just basically accompany you on the journey.
And you talk about personal and ancestral guides. Could you tell the audience the difference between those two?
Yeah, so the personal guide, particularly in the regression work that I've done, I've always found that, again, the client will have a more successful journey if they can meet with a guide. So how is that perceived? It could be an angel, it could be an animal, it could be anything. It's or a being of light that's faceless but loving. And so this is a guide that is more about the individual person. Whereas the ancestral guides could be spaces where we can go to actually contact the ancestors who, as you mentioned earlier, are knocking on our doors every minute of our lives. And perhaps we've never bothered to say hello to them before. So.
Yeah. And you talk too also about forgiveness being essential for any work. And that is simply, are you talking about just letting go or forgiving what they did or what you did? How exactly does forgiveness work?
Again, this gets into the parents, I think, a lot of the time, because the doorway into the ancestral past has to do with meeting with the higher self of mother or father, and then traveling into the past to do that healing. But because we could bypass that, but really because they are almost like standing at the gates to the doorway that leads into the ancestral lineage of mother or father, there is exercise in the book, a whole section on trying to come to terms with and trying to forgive the parents at a deeper level so that the rest of the work can become easier. And again, that's a part, I think, for sure, for some people, they'll be able to say, there's just no way I can even begin to do that. I'm not going to do it. And so then I just obviously invite people to say, okay, well, you don't have to. You can still do these processes without that. But I do think it's a key to some of the other things as it's able to be done by an individual, which varies, obviously.
I like how in one of the exercises you do an exchange of gifts. I thought that makes perfect sense. You give something to them, they give something to you. It's a transaction, but it shows goodwill and it shows that you're both working on these issues.
Yeah, I think the energy exchange can be very valuable. There's some of these are more symbolic, right? When you ask somebody, okay, I'm going to reach inside myself now and I'm going to give something to someone. Maybe I've never even thought of this before, right? Because this is coming from the depths of the soul and from the interdimensional self that you've been talking about all this time. So you're just bringing this out and noticing what it is. What does it represent? Why is it time for me to give this to this person? And what are they going to be doing with it? And then receiving something. And then again, acknowledging what that means to the person. There's a healing there that can happen. And also just kind of almost like putting pieces back into the energetic puzzle of the self that can help with healing as well.
And you talk about your inner sacred space. So don't you advise have like an altar or something physical? Is it, but the inner sacred space is different, or?
Yeah, I mean, many people we could set up an altar where we can have pictures of the ancestors, flowers, other things as we so desire. But in the spiritual work and the guided imagery that I have been writing about, there's an inner sanctuary inside the mind as well. And so when we bring light through the body, relax, cross that threshold into that first space. In other books, I've called it the happy place. You can call it whatever you want, but it's a place where your soul feels nurtured, protected, safe, secure. You can decorate this place however you want. There's no budget. There's no limits, so you can then if you keep going through the door and begin these journeys in this first interdimensional room, then it becomes very familiar. It's just like any other habit you would get into. You start going in there, and then you notice that different doorways can lead to different places. And it's just a place for spiritual restoration, encouragement, support. And here is where you would meet with either ancestral guides, or just re-energizing your own being.
And do you work with clients one-on-one to help them for either past life regression or ancestor healing?
I have done many. Yes. Right now I'm kind of working on some writing, so I'm taking a bit of a hiatus from that. But yes, for over 20 years, I have worked with many people, so people can stay tuned. So.
And you also talk about grace being very important. And it's also a subject I've sort of come back in my life after leaving Christianity for a while and realizing, this grace stuff, it definitely has something to say, and it's important. Of course, I've been clean and sober for 12 years, gone to Alcoholics Anonymous, all that. So of course, grace is important because you're always like, why me? You do all the work, you keep relapsing, you keep doing drugs, and then one day it's almost like something happened and you just go, oh my God, I get it now. The light really does shine, and suddenly you're like, I can stay sober, and I feel great. And as you remember, you go back, there has to be some grace there. For some reason, this loving kindness from the divine chose to finally wash over me. So, but tell us about how you use grace.
I say congratulations to you. That is amazing. That is an incredible, amazing accomplishment. And just grace. I think we might be more apt. And again, you mentioned Christian grace. I think it is a very Christian idea, but really isn't it also just kind of a universal idea if we would even, maybe we weren't noticing it, right? I mean, I think we're more willing to extend that loving kindness to someone else a lot of the time than to ourselves, because we're very hard on ourselves. Is it okay for me to realize that, hey, guess what? We've all messed up. We've all done stuff. Everybody has done things they probably wish they hadn't, but guess what? There's a loving presence who loves us anyway, and we can extend that light to ourselves. And then as we do that, then that makes it easier for us to extend grace to, again, if there's unforgivable things that we feel that have happened, that others have done and things like that, we can extend that grace to others. So just opening to the idea that maybe we can just say, okay, maybe things happen for a reason. Maybe I believe that people are really doing the best they can for the most part. I mean, obviously that still doesn't mean that some things are not inexcusable, but if we feel like people have really wronged us or something, could we just extend grace, or at least extend grace to ourselves to maybe feel like it's okay that I'm upset about this and I can't let go of it? Just, okay, well, guess what? That's where I am right now. Let's give ourselves some grace and just be okay with where we're at. Like you said, I mean, it's probably a lifelong endeavor, I think, to open to more of that kind of energy, especially as it relates to turning that kind of love towards ourselves.
Well said indeed. Yeah. And the older I get, the more I realize regardless of who. It's great to have a teacher, or we're talking about a meditation tape. It's anything, as we started at the beginning of the interview, that can quiet you down. Because again, not only our ancestors, the universe is always speaking. Our bodies are telling us right now what we need to do to be healthy too. And it's loudly saying this. So I always joke that I think enlightenment is just learning how to listen. As simple as it is, it's one of the hardest things you can do, right, Shelley? Just quieten down and listen to the universe. That has all the answers, just as your ancestors have all the answers, just as your body knows what it needs, and just quiet down and boom, get the answers. It's so simple, we miss it.
It's so simple, it's practically impossible. I think we're always just doing. I mean, I always was like that. I've got to be doing something all the time. We've got to be creating or, accomplishing something or whatever. No, I mean, you just have to sit and allow what's meant for you can show up if we're not always out just trying to make things happen that may or may not even be the best thing for us,
Yeah, even when you were talking about getting pneumonia, and as an American, it's like, I don't have time. It's like,
yeah, I was like, I don't have time to go to the hospital.
Yeah, or I don't have time to die. I got a busy schedule. It's so American.
Exactly.
Do. Yeah, just sitting down and breathing, or sitting down and listening to the woods or whatever. It does take practice. And again, we've been so programmed, like you said, we're programmed to talk and not listen. That's for sure. I'm very good at that. And just always be doing instead of for example, there's a beautiful quote in the Gospel of Thomas, and people ask Jesus about, salvation. And he just said, it's a movement and a meditation. It's do something and stop and listen. Do something and stop and listen. And Hermes in the, in the Corpus Hermeticum always does the same thing. They're doing all this stuff. And then he goes, all right, everybody, shh, just quiet. Everybody just sit there and listen and reflect on the universe. So yeah, we don't want to be too passive.
Well, there it is. I mean, the masters have been doing this, but again, do we remember that maybe they gave us a few clues? I don't know, hopefully we will.
Hopefully. What do you think, Graham? Or any questions on your end?
I was going to sit there and say one of the additions that I would add there, in addition to listening, is don't jump at the laser pointers that are trying to distract us from the path. It's, you got to do stuff, but you have to not do the wrong things. It's better to do nothing than the wrong thing, is that one. But I think Shelley nailed it. Is, so much of what she's saying here is forgiving other people is so much easier than forgiving myself. It's, and part of it is I know all the, everything, my motivations, all the reasons I did it. And it's just, it's so much harder for that one. And part of my approach is I've never understood the idea of people trying to be perfect. My goal has always been to be better, because I can at least achieve being better today than I was yesterday, at least some days. And my goal is to stop making the mistakes I've been making, so I can move on to and start making some new mistakes.
Yes.
Learn some new things.
Well said. Yeah,
that is interesting. Yeah, and the laser pointer, the cat there, my kids have those laser pointing for the cats, and it's like, yeah, I understand the distractions, because I'll walk by and the kids are with the laser pointer, and the cats are like, you cats, that is not prey. It's useless. And the cats are chasing those laser points. It's almost, it's our culture, right, Graham? I mean, it's built to keep us distracted for certain actions that they want us to do, right? Who needs a society of awakened people?
Yeah, when you got a 24/7, 365 news channel to fill, you gotta perfect your laser pointers.
Exactly. It's a great analogy, because you're exactly right. It's like, oh, something shiny. Yeah. Oh, it's like, no, let's slow down a little bit, enjoy it.
The other thing I also wanted to talk about, which I think is a wonderful thing, and I've been playing around with it, and that is, you talk about, obviously, life regression is useful for ancestral healing. We've talked about, but you write that you can actually rewrite rewrite history for future generational thinking. Could you expand on that? Because again, obviously science is behind us, right? Retrocausation, the idea that some particles actually move back in time. Of course, we all hear about the Mandela effect. And yeah, it seems like the future, as Graham likes to quote Alan Moore, all history is fiction. Can we change the fiction for our benefit, Shelley?
Yes, we can. This concept of rewriting our history, the process that I developed when taking people through past life regressions, the first book I wrote on that is called Life Stream. So we take a journey into the past, and then at the end of the journey, we go out into the future, not into a future life, but into this current life future. And I have people go to a place where you're happy, you're healthy, whatever problem that you thought you were having at this point, it's gone now, and you've resolved it, and everything's wonderful. Because people can go to the happy place just like they can go to the horrible place. We're always making up horrible things in our mind that never are going to happen, but we could actually consciously create something that we want to create. And so likewise in this book now, we're going through some prompts here where we really can start saying, what do we want to create? There's a reason, I think, why we have like a calling in our soul of things that we really want to do or things that we're attracted to. That's the depths of your inner being, yourself, your soul calling you to what you want to do. But sometimes you're thinking, well, I want to be a mountain climber, but I don't even know how to take the first step, so this helps people just to think about, like, what are the steps that I would take to get here? And this is what they were doing under guided imagery. So you've gotten to this great place where everything worked out. And the problem that you had today is no longer here. So what was the first thing you did? And they said, well, I read this book, and then I did this, and then I did this and this. And people can actually, yes, reverse engineer their reality. And then the biggest obstacle then isn't, can we write all this stuff down? Or can we, in this case, in this book, or can we go out on a journey and see all this wonderful stuff and figure out how we got there? The biggest obstacle is believing in yourself and your journey enough to actually try doing some of it. We can't just sit on a lotus petal, in the Om state and expect, well, maybe we can in the future, maybe, but, let's just say in this current reality, we actually do have to maybe get out and take those first steps to move in the direction of that future. And if we have enough courage in some ways, if we have enough belief in the self to say, okay, I'm going to, I saw that book in my mind. I'm going to go pick that up at the library. I'm going to go to the store and buy that one or get on Amazon, whatever. And then I'm going to do this and this. And I'm just going to start moving in that direction with that end goal in mind. I mean, we know that's how goals and dreams are created. We can read business books, right? But then we don't always do those things, or we don't understand it's not just business books. There's a spiritual dimension to this, and it begins in the mind about what you believe, but also I think that you will be drawn to the thing that you truly want because it's some calling from your soul that likely has something to do with your purpose or things that you plan to accomplish while you're here, so yeah, and it can work. Just try it.
Yeah, and if anything, we all have a purpose, a sacred purpose designed by the universe to heal the universe. And it's very important. It doesn't matter who we are, what our place in society is, and is important. But at the very least, knowing that you have the ability to heal your ancestors and your past lives, that should, as complicated as we've talked about, Shelley, that should make you pretty satisfied and proud, right? That you have this honor, this duty to make sure that your ancestral line is healed and flows well, and that these ancestors haven't worked their karma out, and you can help them work things out and work their own pain. They're still in, some of them are in a lot of pain.
Yes.
I might have an ancestor who's still drunk on some alley, and I can help him or have him understand that his life wasn't wasted, and that he can perceive or absorb some of the grace, and he can experience it no matter where he is.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I mean, we really can help these ancestors. And again, it may feel like baby steps to us, but you just never know. When we were floating over some of these battle scenes, sending light to an ancestor who someone would identify there, right? I mean, let's face it, we're not going to turn cartwheels and start jumping for joy when we're in the middle of 1,000 people, having a battle. That's not going to happen. But can we make the intensity of that energy just feel a little bit lighter? And then can we move on from there and just try to lighten things up a little bit? It can make a huge difference. And it is, it's something that we don't think we have any time maybe for anything in this world because we think we're so busy, but we can take a couple minutes a day. Or however long we decide we want to do such a thing. It doesn't actually take that long because, as you've already said, there isn't any such thing as time, and we're here to do this work for a reason.
Right. So. Well said. Well said. Well, as we get to the end, I also wanted to, if you would indulge us and maybe talk about your book, The Goddess Rediscovered, which I got a copy a while back, but scheduling, we couldn't do it. And of course, here in the show, we are all about the Gnostic Sophia and Mary Magdalene and some of the ancient goddesses and beyond ancestors. Of course, in this show, we talk about we need the divine feminine to balance a society that's been off kilter for too long. So would you tell the audience about your book too, that book?
Yes, I would love to. I actually have that one here.
There you go. There you have my copy there.
This book, a lot of the books that I've released in the last few years kind of came about during the pandemic when we all thought that this was a 2-week problem and then it turned into a 2 to 3 year problem. And everyone knows what I'm talking about. So I had created an energy healing modality, and I was supposed to go teach some classes on a book that came out in 2019. It didn't happen. So I had a group of students. We started learning all kinds of things online, and they were very fascinated with the idea of goddesses because I had written a book about Egyptian energy healing, and we started talking about the gods and goddesses. And I started working with people and realizing that when they connected with the sets of deities that they worshipped in ancient times in Egypt, like there was a different set in Heliopolis than in Memphis, for example, that the past life regressions that would come out of those encounters would be a lot more detailed than if we didn't try to pinpoint exactly what part of Egypt they were from, for example. And so this got into this discussion about, well, I think I want to write a book just about the Egyptian goddesses. And then someone said, what about, all the goddesses? And I said, yeah, that's great. So I started looking into, just what was out there. There were some fabulous books by the late, great Patricia Monahan. And I thought, wow, these are pure scholarship. Amazing. I wanted to know something about all of the deities. And so I went on a several-year-long epic journey, which I wasn't even sure I could complete during certain times, to put together. It's part goddess encyclopedia. It has over 500 deities in it from the ancient world in part 1 and then living religions in part 2. And then, of course, I have to ask myself the question, like, what is it within the soul that is calling us to work with deity? And based on the experience I had working with the students, I thought, it's got to be past life connections, because you know how much judgment there is in this world about this belief system versus that belief system. But the reality is, our ancestors engaged with these deities in ancient times. And so it's got to be past lives. But then, as we've discussed, I started thinking, the other thing is got to be the ancestors, because our ancestors worship these deities. We encountered them in our past lives. And so I've got exercises in the book there where we can go meet with deities. We can talk to those that our ancestors encountered and things like that. So we're kind of still coming at it from the past lives and the ancestral healing aspect as well.
Do you have any goddesses that really speak to you? Again, I mentioned Sophia, but last year it was Artemis really spoke to me, and I had some dedication. Of all the goddesses, one of the most unforgiving and harsh of all the gods, but I deserved it. I needed it. But so Artemis and Sophia have been mine in the last year. What about you, Shelley?
It's Vesta. It was surprising when I wrote this book. Each chapter, I try to give people kind of a brief summary of the religious history of the different areas that we're in. And so I kind of went through these totally different feelings and energies as I was putting this together. The ancient Romans just captured me, and I would have a lot of visions of my lararium, my little family altar and the hearth burning and things. And I still have that very present with me. I'm not, I guess, I've been a lot more grounded the last few years. The pandemic grounded everyone, and then I got out for a while, and now I'm kind of back into a more grounded space. So I'm still really kind of tuned into that. The other thing, as an entire pantheon, the Celts were really strangely kind of terrorizing to me. And so I had to kind of sit with myself and say, what is going on? I mean, there's been a lot of great books written about Celtic goddesses. We all know that. Mm-hmm. But I started to realize, I think it's because of the ancestors who were from Ireland. I think there was something like, I'm not worthy, or I don't know, or, oh my gosh, I better do this right, or it's going to be horrible, and so I really kind of worked through that. But yeah, and so I'm inviting readers, along the way. How are you feeling? Hopefully people find it interesting to learn about all of the beautiful people and cultures that we have in this fantastic world that we live in. So on that level, I hope that by studying archetypes and things, we can realize that all people, since the beginning of time, we all want the same things, right? I mean, love, we need shelter, we need food to eat. So let's think about our commonalities, and then let's think about the beautiful diversity of creation that we all are. And so there's that aspect of it. But likewise, as we're going through the material, you can't help but have feelings about some of this. So how are those feelings, and what are they? And let's make some notes about that. So by the time we get to the end of the book, then people could really explore, like, where is that coming from, as kind of a way to awaken again these dormant parts of the soul and really get to know who we are at the deepest level of the soul and the self. And again, at a different level, using different tools, which is the deities, the goddesses, to connect with our ancestors and our former selves. So
beautifully said, and couldn't agree more. Well, Grandma, any goddess speaks to you, and any last question before we wrap it up for Shelley?
Oh, I was going to say the goddess that I've always been kind of preferential to is Tyche. That's the Greek goddess of fortune. And, again, went from being the personified one to being much more of a force of nature later. And I figure if you're going to have a goddess, I want the one that's going to give me luck when it counts.
Yes.
Lucky a lady tonight.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, we are at the end. I highly recommend individuals please get Ancestral Energy Healing. I cannot wait for the audio meditations. I'll be your first customer probably when it comes out. But where can people go find out more about you? It'll be in the show notes. But for those listening,
yes, they can go to pastlifelady.com, and it's all there. So.
Well, we are at the end. I hope you guys have found the doors to walk through with the god of the mind, Hermes, or whatever goddess you have. Meet your ancestors. They're waiting for you. Your life, your purpose is there waiting for you. And it's going to be amazing, rewarding. So, Graham, thanks for keeping us company on this journey.
Oh, always a pleasure, Miguel. And it was wonderful to meet and interact with Shelley.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much, Graham and Miguel. It was a complete joy to spend this time with you.
Likewise. And thank you very much for coming on the show, and good luck with your next project and your ancestors and your past lives. Yeah.
Thank
no
you.
Time. Yeah. You don't have time to rest.